debt payments. There just wasn't enough coming in and community authority charges. Plus 2008, 2009, things weren't looking so good for the housing industry. So we kept reissuing those notes, and after 5 years we were paying down some of the principal. But the other thing that really worked to our advantages is those short-term one-year rates were really low. There was 1 year where we borrowed like $12 million. We only paid 0.21% interest on that. And so I did, now that I know what we're at right now, I did a kind of my own calculation going back and kind of did a what if in 2010, if we would have issued 20-year bonds roughly 10 years ago, and I used the interest rates we obtained on our rec levy money that we borrowed, because that was pretty much all we borrowed like $12 million at that same time. And I laid that out and said if we would have done that and the interest we would have paid over those ensuing years, and then I compared that to what we actually paid in interest by rolling those notes, plus each year we had issuance cost, which was an incremental cost. But the analysis indicates that over that 9 or 10 year period, we paid, and these are actual costs for our note issuance, $642,000, almost $643,000 in interest and issuance cost. You know, our annual issuance cost was maybe $10,000, $12,000 a year of that. Had we issued bonds at this point after 10 years, we would have already paid out $3.1 million. And that's to have us in the same place as far as outstanding principal. In both scenarios, today we would have $7.1 million of outstanding debt. And again, part of that's because you're paying 4.5% on those 20-year bonds that you issued way back when. And that average interest rate for that issue was maybe 2.8, 2.93% compared to the much lower rates that we've been received. I've seen in the last couple of years that's pushed up. In fact, last year our 1 year rate was 1.78%. This year it'd probably be above 2%, but we were able to lock in 10-year bonds at a 2% rate, and so it's really worked out well, I think, from a strategic standpoint.
Excellent.
So that'll get finalized here. We close next week, and I think as we communicate to this is the Southern Community Authority, we'll probably have a meeting in August. We'll be able to update them on the status of where we're at with that part of cost. We're not necessarily incurring any additional costs related to the Community Authority may have to pay for, with the exception of those intersection improvements, which we did get some buy-in from the JVS. And is the state kicking in, or the county? County's kicking in some money, but we've already bid that out, I think, and we know what that cost is, and so we know where we stand with that. But pretty much we've got things locked down now with our cost side. It's just a matter of how quickly the revenue streams come in and how that compares. There is still a policy issue. We may have to have some further follow-up discussion. What we've done over the years is the general intent was that this new community authority charge was going to pay for the cost of Glen Road. Mm-hmm. And it looks like it will and can. We also put in place out there a $1,000 basically single family per lot transportation fee that was somewhat targeted for other transportation related improvements in the area. Because of the environment we were in 2008, about that time, when that was originally put in place and we started collecting that fee, I've kept it in a separate fund and we've not utilized it for anything. Pretty much keeping it back as a reserve, or at least allocating it towards the potential cost of paying back the money that we borrowed for Glen Road. Because back then I wasn't real upbeat on whether the community authority charges a loan, and so I didn't want to get into a point where we're falling way short, and meanwhile we've spent some money that otherwise could have been designated. And I believe we did take a look at the legislation, or what, I don't know if there was legislation, I think it were notes or whatever put on the development plans. That money can go towards the cost of Glen Road, but it doesn't have to. And there are other uses potentially of those funds. We're at a point today where we're in pretty good shape with even the existing housing that's in the ground. Even if we don't have a whole lot more, we'll be able to pay off this debt. The question becomes, do we still allocate that $1,000 to project and what's the effect of that both ways. Well, if we continue to do that, as we continue to collect that fee, that time frame that the charge may be in place probably isn't going to materially change it. It could possibly, instead of it be in place another 8 years, maybe make it such it's only in place for 7 years. But probably not, but it may. And so the question we ask is, A, do we continue to allocate those funds? And we are still, and I've always communicated to the community authority members, I'm showing that as a revenue source to offset the costs, but there's no requirement. We're only doing that because trying to make this work. It may be at some point when we get to that point, even the existing fees, the $1,000 fees we've collected, could be designated for some other purpose.
Plus there are other, and Dean and I had talked about this over the last few years, there was a point where we had enough of a gap that we really needed to take a look at that, using that revenue, and that's what we've been making that assumption up until now. Given the fact that we have an adequate revenue stream now through the charges, and there are other projects that are in that southeast corridor that were included at the time that council, we passed a resolution at some point regarding that $1,000 fee, such as connecting Cheshire Road to 23, and there's some others. That's the discussion we have to have with council, but then obviously with the authority, and then we come back and make a recommendation. But the good news is we have some flexibility that we didn't have before.
It has to be used for something, transportation related in that.
Yeah, there were projects that Bill had recommended back when we set up our TIF districts down there, and back when we set up this transportation, this additional $1,000 that's being imposed upon lots. It's not an impact fee, it's a transportation fee that we put in place down there, because we knew that in addition to Glen Parkway, we had other road improvements that needed to be done. We haven't had the luxury really to allocate to anything but Glen Parkway up until now, and we could, and that's what we.
It was kept somewhat, like I said, very clear. It was kept as a buffer, just in case. Just like, if you recall, it's probably been 10 years ago, we set up that development reserve fund that I indicated. It could be a fund there that we can use if the right type of development economic development opportunity presents itself. Maybe we have some funds there we can build it and that come. But secondarily, it provides, we were allocating money to it that if we did get to the point where we had to issue bonds and started paying a higher level of principal on that debt, and the community authority charges were half of what we needed to pay annually, instead of hitting our general fund, we've anticipated that could be the case, and we could buy ourselves several years of dealing with that with funds set aside. Again, that's not, at this point, I don't believe that's going to be necessary unless, a third of those houses burn up in a fire or something, and all of a sudden we have no assessed valuation. But just to order of magnitude, we probably collected a little over about $1.1 million in this $1,000 transportation fee going back to when the first house was built. And that 1.1 million, if I look at it down the road 6, 7, 8 years, that'll be about an annual year's worth of NCA charges. So even if we were, and I'm not saying we should, even if we were to go back and say those monies are still sitting there because they're still sitting in that fund, rather than apply them towards the Glen Road cost where you've got something else. If we were to do that, it would add a year to the time duration that the community charge would be in place. So. And then again, as I said, at some point we might want to have that discussion. We should probably have it and get the input from the policymakers before the August meeting of that community authority board, because at some point we probably want to indicate where we're going to be with it. It could be that what was collected will stay and apply toward, it could be future collections are going to go to a different purpose or some variation thereof.
And there's no time limitation on the spending of those funds, right? We can keep those in perpetuity.
No.
Right.
Unlike an NCA fee or something.
Right, and unlike a real impact fee where you have to pay it down. But the expectation is that it's going to be used for improved transportation down there. So,
well, we know we have plenty of potential needs that transportation funding can.
And Bill, you had indicated that, in your opinion, the project that you would recommend if we did have an additional source of revenue down there would be
Yeah, we had 3 projects really. Finished the Cheshire Road realignment is one.
Bring that out to 23.
23. Vista Ridge connection, which is behind the Council for Older Adults, very south end of the project, finish that connection. And there's an unnamed road connection that really extends the entranceway to the subdivision north of Cheshire.
Cheshire Crossing?
Cheshire Crossing.
Oh, it's the Bromiller
Brings that
connection.
south across through the development by the water tower into the Cheshire Road extension as a public street. So those 3 projects are the ones, but certainly the arterial Cheshire Road realignment, completing that's a priority for us.
And again, it's an example of kind of growth helping pay for what impacts growth has. I mean, that Cheshire Road connection is old Cheshire Road, as you know, is kind of circuitous. So anyway, that's
Okay.
good update.
All right. What next?
We can go to item 4. If we
Okay.
CIP plan amendments?
I didn't want to hand out a lot of pages of numbers to you, but what I did put in front of you here before the meeting is really and it'll be easy to walk through, some of the proposed changes, more so to where we're at with a couple projects as opposed to what typically I'd like to do each year, the first part of the year with our capital plan, looking at it and revisiting if things have come up. Well, it's got pushed back in a couple things. Now here we are in April, and we're ready into kind of finalizing things for the year. But there were several things that I think I want to lay out and talk about and share with the committee. And so really all you have here are the pages that there's proposed changes to the plan, and most of those are all relative to 2019, the current budget year. So on that first page, that's that general fund summary, which shows how we're allocating our general fund money that we use for capital improvements. And the beginning number that changed, they're all in dark blue. That carryover balance, that's always a hard number to get my hands around and figure out where it is when we're, in July when we're looking at. But that number did bounce up. I spent some time trying to reconcile back to some of our grants and what the actual project costs were. So that number increased, which helps obviously. The other change there under revenues, and one of the recommendations is that we allocate an additional $650,000 from our general fund in 2019. I think I'd shared with you towards the tail end of the budget cycle, but even at the first part of the year, that we did fairly well from a budget standpoint in 2018 general fund. Our revenues were higher than anticipated, and our expenses were at or below, and so we had that flexibility. And this is where it kind of connects back into what was the number 3 item, these financial management policies. Several years ago, we put in place a policy of sorts of looking at strategically that notion of, what should our general fund reserve balance be, how we set that, how we determine that, balance budgets and all that sort of thing. And the general intent was it's not a one point in time type of number. It's what are we targeting as having as a reserve balance. And settled on that 17% after sharing some information of industry standards and different things. And I think I explained it at the time that it's a number we target to be at. And sometimes the timing of when revenues come in on an annual basis, but we also have to look at what we're committing sometimes, especially in a situation where we maybe had a decent year from a budget perspective. Are you committing additional spending towards long-term type of continuous expenses? Increasing service levels? Are they one-time expenditures, and how do we want to do that? We've worked kind of under that scenario for many, many years. We'd typically wait till the end of the year. If we had a little bit higher amount in there, we'd transfer more money into the general or to the CIP, because that was generally council's intent over the years, that we've got plenty of roads that need to be fixed and whatever else. That's a higher priority than whatever else, changing levels of service. The connection back to those management policies, as I had presented, I think, at the last Finance Committee meeting about, because this year with our budget, we had a lot of back and forth, spent a lot of time talking about, a balanced budget and what's the impact and what's the effect of that. And I think I'd indicated that we could actually put in our financial management policies, which council adopts by resolution, a policy that defines clearer what a balanced budget is. this is an example. I knew going into the tail end of the year before we adopted the budget that we were going to have revenues that we could allocate to something other than what was included in the 2018 budget. If I would have added that transfer as an appropriation for 2019, guess what? Now our general fund, instead of being whatever it was, $200,000 out of budget, it's now going to be $850,000 out of budget. And even though the dynamics of that, but what comes across is, oh my gosh, we got deficit spending. We can't adopt a balance. We have to adopt a balance. So it makes it difficult, tricky to really utilize. And you know, we're pretty lean, I think, and we budget pretty tightly. And we don't just spend money because there's an appropriation. I think I can show that historically, including last year. We had any number of different departmental budgets where they came in well under what was appropriated. You know, we tend to address the needs and we monitor that fairly closely. In doing that, there may be a year or two, hasn't been too many, where unfortunately our costs were a little higher, or maybe our revenues didn't come in where, and so we can monitor that and stay on track with that. 2018 happened to be a pretty decent year from that perspective. So, you know, the other option to putting that and dealing with that as part of the budget and having a bit more input on what to do with those additional funds is we end up coming back perhaps with something like this, and that's not a bad thing. Can look at that and say, well, we can, and I'm not presuming anything. There may be some other purpose that you might want to look at that $650,000. Where'd that amount come from? Again, looking at our general fund, that basically gets us to a 20% reserve fund balance, even above the 17% target. So real comfortable with that as an amount. Could it be more? It could, but to get the dialogue going, I wanted to put something in front of you and indicate what that might look at. So I'm showing it here just as an additional general fund transfer. If we were to do that, that would have to be one of the budget changes we would make, supplementing the appropriation to transfer an additional $650,000. How or where that might get utilized is where you might, you know, where you'd obviously have some input. And so I'll talk about a couple things on the next couple pages of where and how that may be utilized. So on that first page, the other items in blue, if you can pull them out of there, under airport improvements, those are all going to zero. So we got an offer on selling the airport, and we thought, not just kidding. I'll explain that here on the next page. Then under sidewalk maintenance, it's one of the other summary pages I'll talk about and why that number's changing. If you flip to the next page, with the airport improvement fund, there's been some changes related to how to utilize that grant money, and most of this is grant money. And the timing of when it occurs and whether we do, most of it's tied to pavement area resurfacing. Those are the primary projects. So Bill had some changes that he wanted to do that more reflected what probably is going to occur. What changes as far as the impact of our general fund, how much money we have to put into it, didn't really substantially change. I was able to reduce it to zero because we have two funds that we track our FAA grant funds. One's the discretionary amount that we get, roughly $150,000 a year. The other FAA fund that we maintain is for monies that we go after that are, no, the one's the allocation. The other one, it might be a $500,000-600,000, we don't know, we can't predict it. But over the years, we try to keep those things separate, and sometimes the money gets shifted from one grant to the other. And anyways, bottom line is we had about $90,000 in residual funds, and those, I could do one of two things. I could pass legislation to transfer it back into the general fund because that's where it came from. Or what I do is I'm just going to leave it in these funds, and then that'll reduce our future commitments for the city's share of these grants. So bottom line is that CIP allocation goes to zero, whereas in the past it was probably $90,000 or $100,000. That's really the only change other than the timing of the projects. If you flip to the next page, this is what is our street improvement, where we try to summarize some of our costs that we spent on street improvements. The next page is grant projects, which also are mostly street projects, but we try to segregate them. The changes here is under local streets. See, it's at $500,000. That number was $150 when we approved the CIP, and that's what we put in the budget. So part of it's just throwing that out there, that if we bump that up to $350,000 to $500,000, maybe we can, and I don't know where we're at with our bids yet this year, whether we can get additional $350,000 of local street work done yet this year.
So can I interrupt for a second? Because
Sure.
I know we're getting ready to spend some money with the county on Section Line Road, is that right?
Right.
So how does that play into this?
Well, this would be an addition. So what we talked about when we approved that was we were gonna, if we were able to identify additional funding sources, we would replenish what was previously there, which was the
150.
150. I think it's 119, Bill, I think is the amount with the county.
That we're spending with them?
Yes. And so what we're proposing here is replenishing that and then some, and directing Bill to, when we do the street resurfacing bid, target local streets, which we have been not being able to target.
So prior to doing this, we would be doing section line at 115 and maybe another one for 45,000 or for 35,000. Now, if we bump that up, we'll still do section line for 115, but we can do $385,000 of other work. It's just a suggestion. It's not anything. You may have differences of opinion with it. Additionally, on this page, the next number that changes is the city grant match transportation improvements. I'll talk about that on the next page. And then at the bottom, called the DeGenova Way Connector, we think that's been shared with City Council, connecting over out there by the YMCA, where the parking lot kind of stubs, and that section of road that's the developers extending back there and building right now.
That's Boulder Drive that comes across,
Yeah,
right.
so there's a gap there.
Right.
And that gap, Bill, you estimate, is about,
So if we estimated 30,000, might be a little bit high, but we want a number in there that we could jump in the contract.
and get that done, because that road is open, so it's really the parking lot connected to the road.
New road that's
So
going
if you're parked out there, you'd be able to get right on Boulder Drive as opposed to going back out past the Y and out onto Boulder, or out onto Count.
That was always intended to occur, but we just didn't know when the developer was actually going to build Boulder. It makes sense, but now that it's under construction, so that would be a change. And then the next page is the grant projects, and really there's only one project that's changing, and it's changing somewhat substantially. I think there's been some communication back and forth, and this is related to the East William Street federal earmark project. Our bids ended up coming in $5.4 million roughly. Pre-bid, we had $4.25 million. The engineering and Bill and those, they were able to go back to some of the grant entities and bump up that amount. When we actually adopted the capital plan last year and when we adopted our budget, we were looking at two grants. One was the ODOT earmark amount of $2.5 million, something like that. And the other amount was MORPC STP funds of about 750, something in that neighborhood. Subsequent to that, we were able to acquire, even before the bids were open, ODOT safety funds, 650,000. So we were in a situation, if the bids would have come in at 4.2 million, that we might have an additional, that 671,000 of city money might be able to be used elsewhere. Bids did come in higher, so we're probably back to that, and then a little bit more that committed from the city out of city funds. Instead of 671, it's 742, but they were able to get additional grant funding even on top of the both with the ODOT safety money and the MORPC money that pushed that up to where our gap is 742,000. This just reflects those changes. You can see at the bottom the project cost now, or the amount in there, instead of 4.2 million, it's 4,383,000. This will be something we'll need to come back to council, and I think perhaps we're looking at even Monday being.
Because the bids, Bill, are open until, want to just review that?
Another 45 days.
So we'd like to get that before council, get it acted on so that the bids can be awarded and the project.
The change will be a supplemental because we only appropriated 4.25 million. We need to up that to 5.38. Again, some of that's covered by additional grant money, but the effect is about $50,000 of additional CIP fund we'll need. So, based on what we had originally approved, and that number carries forward to that street page prior to it. So it's just showing that of our street money, here's what's going to grant match money. The next page is building maintenance improvements, and we had, I think council was aware, we had two supplementals that I think we brought to city council last year related to the Cohatch building or the annex building, not just the initial work for Cohatch, but also I think the initial supplement was to create shelf space on the second floor. There was estimated money that it was going to take to do that, and then we came back a little bit later and said, we've got some resources availability, let's finish it off, and so we had those 2 supplementals. Where we're at currently, I think things pretty much lined up. There were a few, and Jackie can probably get into some specifics if you want to, but there were some cost overruns and things related to the alleyway and a number of other different types of things. But at the end of the day, we're going to be about $160,000 above those supplemental amounts that we had put in last year's budget. So this we'd probably be coming back to City Council to supplement a line item, perhaps Monday night, to get all that work wrapped up.
Jack, you want to mention?
Where the project stands right now is with they're working on finishing off the interior of the second floor, and then as well the Skywalker will be installed in the next few weeks. So it's all good news. We ended up a list of things that we had thought about doing in-house. A lot of it has to do with fixing the asphalt that had to be cut. We had a flooding problem over there, and Jerry and I are proposing that we had to have the sump pump fixed. So we put in a sump pump. That's a temporary fix. What we would like to do is what Jerry is predicting as a more temporary fix. Being where these 2 buildings are located, we always have problems with flooding. And now that the downstairs of the Cohatch building is finished, we want to make sure that we don't damage any of that. And so that's some additional monies that we're asking for to have a more temporary fix. So that means more asphalt and concrete has to be removed and put back in place. We also had taken out a half bath on that second floor, figuring that we could save money by having people cross the walkway. It's been determined that we want to keep a half bath over there just for some, just for the use of some staff, and so that is like $6,500, and we need to move forward on that. The security is estimated like right around $4,200, and then we still have to buy the furniture. We're still waiting for the estimate. It could come in. I'm estimating $50,000, but that's a very high number. And so that could come in a lot lower. So we're still waiting for our estimate for our final furniture drawing.
We expect the walkway to be installed in the next.
Sure, the Skywalker to be installed in the next couple
We're
weeks.
trademarking that name.
And the other thing that we're going to do, I don't know if you've noticed on William Street, we're out here in front of City Hall, the sidewalk is just a mess. It's huge divots, and so we also receive prices about that sidewalk fix. So we figured since we're going to be fixing the sidewalk in front of Cohatch and across the driveway, that it just made sense to go ahead and fix that sidewalk almost all the way up to Sandusky.
Right.
Just because of the condition.
First time. I mean, it's not going to look good if we. Yeah. It doesn't get over there. I think it's easier if we just
go ahead and do it. And if we were going to go ahead with the Welcome Center, the idea was we were going to take stamped concrete and do stamped concrete all the way from Cohatch all the way in front of City Hall, so more like the campus area. It drew all together. But since the Welcome Center has been put on hold at this point, it's just important for just to get fixed. It's a trip hazard, and we know it, and it just needs to be taken care of. The electric poles, taking those down ended up being a lot more expensive than what we intended, and that included even Jerry going out there and cutting lines himself, and because he got tired of waiting for certain utility companies. And we actually had our Parks Department come over and because they had to have the poles taken down so that we could do the footers and such for the Skywalker. So we have tried to do some things in-house, and we want to shut up and finish it up right, and make it a good project. Let's wrap it up.
What's involved in security enhancements? What do we do?
We're it's going to be mostly electronic buttons, people in and out, security, share, everything will be blocked off. So there'll be key cards on the doors.
Same ones that we use here.
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
And the public will have 2 access points. So the first floor access point through the parking lot there, walking up the stairs, you can access the planning office that way, or you can walk the Skywalker.
You can come up through the elevator.
From here, up the elevator over. So, you know, it's just a matter of time before people
realize that people mostly take the stairs anyway, and it's a matter of an education process. You know, most of the people that come up here come up on a regular basis, so the first or second time they're here, they're going to know that they have more direct access right there.
Good.
So that, and several of those things Jackie indicated we haven't undertaken yet, but we got to talking about it, and it just makes sense to finish it off and not have, you know, part of that work, I think, in the alleyway, you got the poles out, but it just tore up a lot, and some of it's asphalt, and just, you know, to go back and patch it, you know, get it to look right. But anyway, I think, you know, 100,000, I think it's another head in there, that should cover where we're at with that. Also related to building improvements, when we did the second supplemental last year, we also council authorized $218,000 to make improvements to City Hall, primarily driven to security issues. We've had a lot of analysis done that says, you know, the building's not secure in any way, shape, or form, and how do we accomplish that? Well, the only thing we've done of anything in nature is we just shut down 2 of the 3 access doors, but you know, there's more to it that needs to occur with that, and I think the general concept is that downstairs the parking lot is going to be that entryway coming into the city, and that we're going to move, you know, the receptionist that sits out front of my office in the main floor down there, and being able to kind of be the gatekeeper, security force, because I don't know if we're capable of doing that. And for, you know, you hate to see it, but in today's day and age, probably be behind glass of some sorts that provides a buffer. But they'll be able to react people. Hopefully we can open up. We don't have code issues that have doors that close. Be able to see that person, people coming into the building. So we still keep there's a lot of people come to City Hall and I don't know where I go. So there'll still be that gatekeeper, but people coming into the building. Right now, there's, other than signs, there's nothing. The other thing we looked at with that is perhaps while we're doing that, we can maybe accomplish something we talked about for a long time, is having that position always a central cashier point. So we've shifted and we're moving the planning department over there, and we're looking at some technology capabilities. I think we can move to a point instead of having people have to go to the various departments, you know, have to go down to Public Works to buy a $25 permit for bulk, whatever else. We can direct the people. You know, our goal is to hopefully through technology enable people to go on, but we're looking at perhaps even locating some kiosks, but basically have a cashier. And then I think one of the areas that will probably come up initially is up there in the planning department. Well, hopefully the people will be able to get paid some of the fees online or whatever else, but if they're over there, we don't need to have a cash drawer for them to pay. If there is somebody that can't pay online or whatever else, then they'll just direct them to come back into this building to the cashier, and then we don't have a cashier in that place, and we can kind of control that a little bit. But our overall goal is to give people as many options as possible to pay their fees without having to necessarily go to various places. And so that, along with perhaps other changes up here on the second floor now that Annie's moving out, again, major, it's just a rough number. Yeah. I think it probably may end up being more than that. And one of the things I'm talking with Tom, you know, rather than looking at it and saying, well, this might be first phase, but we really need to do this. Let's just see what it takes. Be done with it. Let's make some modifications. Let's make the building functional for the 21st century. It's been Jack, we're here. When we did, it was a different time. Yeah. And and a little bit more globally about people moving through the building, how we can utilize the building, be conference days, be after hours issues. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to kind of reconfigure? We don't have a whole lot of latitude because we're pretty much fixed on certain walls, but I think that there's some things we can do to make improvements. Maybe most of the stuff here is 20 years old. To look at and at the end of the day be in a position where pretty good shape with these buildings and should last us for quite some time. How much more than 2? I don't know. One of the things we did have in the budget was $328,000 for the parking lot improvements, and that's appropriated where the former engineering building was. Looks like that.
It's not right now, it's being evaluated. We have a proposal, so we've got to consider that, but we're not going to move ahead with any of that till we come back to you and make
One of the
recommendations.
things is planning. I don't know what the time frame is. Is it still roughly June?
It'll be before June. First, the Skywalker will be installed, and then shortly thereafter, the furniture will be installed. At that point, they can move in, so that it's going to be whenever it works for planning. It just coincides with one of the busiest seasons, spring. And so I'm not going to push planning too hard. We are going to get to a point where we're going to want them to move, and then so it'll be May at latest.
But I think it makes sense for us to follow shortly thereafter because it does create disruptions with, the back alley being closed down and all that sort of stuff, people's access in. I don't know that it's going to be much more than that. We just don't know. I think we want to start looking at some concepts, and we bring somebody in to give us a little bit better number.
We just got to get some costs and get those to you.
But having a little bit of latitude to look beyond that, not just say, well, we can't go over this, we can't do this, which ultimately maybe that's where we need to be. But the fact there is a resource there that I think having that flexibility. Who knows what happens with that engineering building? Maybe we end up putting a parking lot in or not. If we don't, we're not going to incur that cost to that extent. I don't know that it would all necessarily be needed to justify City Hall, but there's a chance that maybe it's just hard to do anything anymore when you start moving a wall or two. You'll be surprised what it ends up costing. But I don't have a number here. But do you have any problems? We do have that appropriation combined. It's a little over $500,000. But I'll come back to City Council and say, hey, here's what we're looking at doing to modify City Hall. Just a number. It's going to cost $405,000. We could full appropriation and we'll complete that and do that. So I wanted to kind of throw that out there, see if you had any thoughts or any concerns or. If that were the case and ultimately don't build the parking lot, so it's but if we still do even in the parking lot, we're a little bit of an estimate. I don't think it's going to be less than that, but
no, it'll probably be around. I feel pretty comfortable with that number with what we were intending on putting in the home center. But we have to wait and see what ends up happening with
we've
the
got a
proposal.
meeting. We're on early May. But good news, the chemistry increase cost is sometimes it's hard to avoid. We're making progress. That's done by the planning department over there, and we'll have a recommendation to you folks about the security enhancements all first floor and this floor, and then some of the other offices, because that frees up with that offices.
Just so clear, one additional cost, that's not coming out of proposed the 650 that we're going to do.
If we were to do the improvements that were appropriate here, 218, if we were to do the parking lot over there at the number we had in there, our costs are a little bit higher for that building. So yeah, it could be coming out. It could come out of whatever. It's an additional amount that we're going to be expending of capital funds.
Right. And just so I'm not sure if I was clear, but some of the work that we were going to have done out front and in the asphalt, we have did in our number for the wall. So we're kind of moving that work. So we're working on needs to be done.
So that has some for the East William Street project for Monday night.
And probably that 160 supplemental. I didn't bring it on with one other thing before because it is capital related. We do have appropriation in there for our ERP change software. We did get bids yesterday. Had 5 or 6 of them or something like that. They're about that thick, just their proposals. So it'll be fun. The projected cost just no analysis looked at what was there. For CMI, our existing support vendors, is upgrading our existing system. It's about $583,000, all the way up to $1.8 million for a or full functional customized type system.
Just so they
Yeah, which I thought so. But they know not letting them bid, even if the number, it's hard to not people have, but there's a lot of they're at that point where we're even able to deal with something like that, because we need to have more technology staff to be able to understand the programming behind it. We're probably still better served by, not that it's the boilerplate, but systems that are specifically written for public sector applications.
We'll know more about that.
But I think we're probably in the ballpark of what we had talked about capital planning, but that'll be a fun endeavor to get that moving on.
So that's site plans. This next item, we're just
Discussed at the retreat, I think part of the direction we have been talked about quite some, for a while. One, and it does relate to budget, is the gas, and what the impact of what the legislature yesterday told the governor will approve means for the city, and your kind of initial thoughts about that, and then just talking about, it's up to you in terms of how you want to discuss the whole 10 cents. Yields us
the 10 point. Did you say 10 cents? I did calculations, so I'm not quite sure, but because there's two changes. One is that from what I read, finalized that local governments were given 45% of the 20 cents.
We went to 45 from 40.
Okay, about 45 to 50 or something, but.
No, it's 45, 46, I think, 40, 55. So we up 5%.
My calculation, it's 10%, but I took that into account too. That. And the number based on our existing for 2018 gas. Without that 40-50, it'd be about $147 of additional money. With what I calculated for response, so half of that would probably, like I had it at 540 seconds, it's probably going to be somewhere in between there. So probably about $500,000 or so.
That's effective. That goes in if the governor signed it. So that's immediately it starts to come for us. And
What do they do with the $4?
So if council elected to consider that would happen in 2020 or later, it couldn't be done this year. Right. Just under 30.
Actually, back they had a little cost even with that gas tax, because they have several different pots that they get the highway money that comes in. We have state highway money, licenses elected at a state level that are recorded as license fee. They can stay with it. We also have a separate license fee fund that is our current purchase of license fee, and that generated $431,000 this year. And so if we go up another $5, related to that. So.
There's additional revenue, road, there's so short of just low that's if yeah, still so local street maintenance resources, where we would not being able to put our resources. So, there on the initial on where you think
one of the things again that I think the topic road levy options was that came here last 2 months or so. Prior to that, council was struggling with this note and had a levy out to ask what are we moving forward. Not nearly where we would have been if we would have had the in combination with that though with just what it did for moving forward. That possible consideration out there or not, or
I think it's an awful time to do a about their decrease some of the fact I think just we're looking for it's splitting at 2.2 we some infrastructure and I will look at so we've covered that piece so if we go up the levy going to be 4 and if it's going to be for infrastructure there are issues with that before everybody's okay with maintenance but the infrastructure
I think that, but I think that we're whatever we do, we want to get us to a state. You say, okay, here's the so we still have $1 million a year, but I think there's not a good time for that. I mean, no, there's never a good because there's always nobody wants to pay and/or it has a levy on her. If we're going to do it, but you can't go back down into this rabbit hole of we're going to make a constantly here, we're going to do this, we're going to do value here, we're going to do value here. Okay, we've got $3 million come in, and what we'll do is we will with maintenance being you can't the whole nitty thing and trying to identify individual projects just terrible. You'll never plus one another one
for a year to see where the 7 but we have to address the new infrastructure needs because we're not going to solve the
one thing I think probably before this probably doesn't necessarily increase but strategically as you issues George indicated the thing of this gas tax money is not restricted by shape or form. It may be used whatever you papers it could be used for make concert on whatever. First, if we were going to give it had a very specific and people needed to know transfer needs are out there just make hard felt nothing else couldn't period roads because you get icing and even at the strategy session, property tax, state boards, so that's going to get, and we'll do it by hopefully we were come back and continue them. We come and a billion years passing, low roads, and by 5 years, it's almost in feet. But there was a number in there that represented something we could go. And this, can assure you that at least 5 years or ones, but eventually road back and road on. That has made our a reasonable positive pass. This issue now, I'm not saying what else, as we look down, ironically, the math is such kind of what our proposed to generate $2 million, represented 8 cents proposal. What we get as 6% compared to 8, as even less like old, so it's good. But there's that, and keep it in our back of our mind as we weigh how to approach that eventually, and how
build your really play but price basically form use well down in the weeds, but what's all that one thing we're looking at 780 that would there well, we're doing this and then so people use street program that fire look at that. Everybody, nice.
we want